Hello, and welcome to the Radiant Mission Podcast. My name is Rebecca Toomey, and I am here with my lovely co host and sister, Rachel Smith.
Hey, everyone.
We are on a mission to encourage and inspire you as you're navigating through your life and with your relationship with Christ. And today we are back to talk about homeschooling again.
Yeah.
Ooh, ooh, go home.
Go home.
Go home. Funny enough, so I'm going to share with our friends here that last week we actually didn't plan to talk about homeschooling. It just so happened that you guys probably realize already that Rachel and I are really chatty Cathys. And when we started recording, we just ended up talking about
It was a tangent. We
schooling.
went on the
And
longest, a 30-minute tangent.
we went all on it for so long. We were like, let's just keep talking about homeschooling.
Yeah.
So we kind of feel like there was a lot we probably missed and that there's more detail that we can dive into. So we planned this episode a little bit better
Yeah.
and have more of a structure for the conversation so that we're not just all over the place with our tangents and stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So,
we've
yeah,
got, go ahead, Ray.
I was just going to say, last week was a little bit of a spontaneous introduction.
There you go.
And
Spontaneous introduction. I like that.
and now we can get into it more just from the perspective of having been homeschooled for you were your whole life, I was most of my life.
Yeah.
I can also speak a bit on being homeschooled and in the public school system since I went to public school in high school.
Yeah.
And so we can give a little bit of like comparing and contrasting in that. But then also we both have chosen to homeschool our own children. And I've been doing that for, what is it, 4 years now? My oldest is going to third grade. So yeah, well, 3 years, I guess.
Come on, homeschool mom, do the math fast, fast, fast.
Here's the thing though, you lose it if you don't use it. You lose it when you don't use it. Yeah. So I feel like
It's true.
it's funny because just the topic of education in general, think about how much we put on kids to learn, like history and science and geography and, all these topics. And as an adult, like, ain't nobody got time for that. Like, we don't learn, like, I mean, hopefully you continue to learn and educate yourself your whole life. But it is like we put so much on kids in these 12 years and it's just all memorizing facts. And then, you forget most of it.
I think that there's a different learning that happens after.
Mhm.
I
That's what you're
actually have
interested
had
in.
different views on the whole concept of college since going through college. And I also went to grad school and then I went into the business world. And I have this opinion that I think that a lot of what we do in school is such a waste of time
Yeah.
because you actually learn on the job. You learn what you need to know
Yeah.
working for what it is that you're going to be doing in your life. And we waste all this time going to school or college, I guess I should say. We waste all this time in college learning stuff that we're never going to need. And then we get to our jobs and we're like, I didn't need any of this. I needed to just be working and learning what I need to know in my job.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely a big fan of internships and actually getting into what you might be interested in early. But that's actually a topic we're going to talk about. So
Mm.
before we get off on a tangent again, I'll reel us back in. We have some questions that we want to explore. And because Rachel and I know that we are incapable of not going on tangents, I'm going to go ahead and share the questions so that you can kind of tune in. And if we get to talking about some of these for too long, we will table them for next time. And so here's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Why homeschool? What are the benefits? Why are people homeschooling? How will I know what curriculum to choose? A lot of choices out there. And those are all kind of, we're bundling that into kind of one topic area. The next topic is, what about when things get really hard, like in middle school and high school? Can I teach a kid in middle school or high school? What do I do? And then the third topic is, can homeschoolers go to college? How do they go to college? How does that all work? So, those are kind of the three topics. Like I said, we're going to dive into it, and whatever we're able to talk about today, we will. What we won't, what we don't get to, we'll table for next time and get into it. But yeah, as Rachel said, we have experienced this ourselves. We both were homeschooled from kindergarten, if is that's a grade.
Not when you homeschool. No, I'm just kidding.
From kindergarten until Rachel went to high school starting in ninth grade. I started
Yeah.
college at 16. We also have two older brothers. Our oldest brother went to school on and off and was homeschooled for periods of time. He also started college early. And then our other brother, that's a little bit older than me, he was homeschooled and he went to college early as well. He was a unique situation also in that he played sports at the public high school while being homeschooled. So he was
Yeah.
homeschooled in high school, but he would get dropped off at high school to go play football, run track,
I
wrestle.
think that's like an important thing for people to know about homeschooling because I was talking to
Mhm,
someone recently who was saying that they have been interested in looking into homeschooling, but their kids are really into sports. So they wanted them to go to such and such school so they can play sports. And I was like, well,
mhm.
homeschoolers can do that. My
Yeah.
brother did that. I mean, it's possible it could depend on the school,
Well,
but
it so you could go to a public school because
to
even
play
though you're
sports. Yeah.
homeschooling your children, you are still paying taxes. And when you're
Right.
paying
Yeah.
taxes, you are paying for your children to essentially go to that school. Now, I always laughed because he said that the kids at that high school he went to were convinced that he went there. Like,
Yeah.
they're like, "Oh, I saw you," like, "I saw you at lunch or whatever." He's like, "I
Yeah.
definitely wasn't there at lunch."
When he
They're
was just getting
convinced.
dropped off at like 2:30 to play
Exactly.
the sports after school.
Exactly. Now, that's a whole other question too, though, is some parents may or may not want their kids to even be involved in the socialization of public high school. So that's kind of a whole other conversation. But when we talk about middle and high school, we can kind of dive into that a little bit.
Yeah.
So let's start with why homeschooling and the benefits and why people are doing this. There's a lot of reasons, and we kind of have a couple of topics that we wanted to talk about. I'm actually going to talk about the second one first because I think that it applies the most to this podcast, and that is many people are choosing to homeschool for religious or moral reasons. You know, a lot of people may want their kid to, especially those listening, might want their children to go to potentially a Christian school, but they can't afford it because it's expensive to go to a private school. And so the only choice for them is really a public school, and they don't feel comfortable putting their child in that setting, maybe in the early years or whatever the case may be. Homeschooling is a place where you can focus on teaching the Bible and teaching the values and the morals that you want for your children, which may not align or be aligned with the public school curriculum. I mean, I think a lot about what is being taught in schools today. And there is a lot of sexuality and sexual topics that are being taught to children at very young ages, and sex ed classes and gender and you can be whatever you want type of stuff very early. And that has been a big motivator for a lot of people to choose homeschooling lately. Just something that I've
Yeah.
noticed.
Yeah, absolutely. I know this can depend on state and school district, but the things that are being approved for public school curriculum when it comes to multiple genders and like you mentioned, sex education and things like that, certain areas are being having this curriculum approved younger and younger, as young as elementary school. And so a religious reason is a big reason to homeschool, because I know for myself personally, I don't I believe that it is my role and my husband's role to be the ones to teach our children things like that.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's also something to be said of how these views from secular society that, kind of come and go and wax and wane, it's it's decided by greater this greater entity and kind of put onto us through media and
Mhm,
whether that's what we watch or the social media that we consume. And then it's also filtered into the education system starting at a younger age, kind of shaping society to accept things as what is normal.
mhm,
And that's the thing with people with and religious views, and this could even be different religions, is our beliefs and morality stay the same because it's all based on what our religion, like for us, it's the Bible, what
mhm,
the Bible says. What the Bible says is a man and a woman and
mhm,
appropriate, and what is
mhm.
sin and what is not. And so we want to choose on educating our children in that way and not have the government educating our children on what they decide now is
What
their
they wanna
version
push.
of
Yeah.
morality. So there's this quote from Vadi Bakum, who is a theologian and pastor. And he says, "We cannot continue to send our children to Caesar for their education and be surprised when they come home as Romans." And I think
Dun,
that
dun, dun.
is a really great way of putting it for those of us with religious values and choosing to homeschool. Is the government is Caesar, and it's not surprising at all when our children adapt the worldviews of their education system. And we want our
Absolutely.
children, and people can say this could be a criticism, well, you're just conditioning our children with our religious values from birth, and we're keeping them home to do that. But the
Mhm.
alternative is they're going to be conditioned from somewhere.
Yeah,
So
they're gonna
it's
be
going to happen.
programmed in
Right.
some way. So, are they going to
Exactly.
be programmed at school with X value, or are they going to be taught and quote programmed at home with Y value?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So, and that's the thing though, is that it reminds me of that verse, train up a child in the way they should go, and when they are old, they will not turn from it. Because when our children are young, I'm talking elementary school age, that's when they're the most influenced and the most malleable with their
Mhm.
brains and their mindsets. And if we're sending them off to somewhere for 7, 8 hours a day, and they are taught whatever the government or, the people within are making decisions on what they should be taught and the beliefs that they should have. And honestly, even if it's not in the curriculum, they could have one particularly strong minded teacher who feels it's very important that kids have whatever value they want them to have.
Mhm.
They're not getting those values from their mother or their father, from their home
Yeah.
and from their parents. Those are the values that they're getting from whoever is giving them those values or from other kids and learning misbeliefs from other kids. And I think that it's important for us to consider these things. And this is a big reason why a lot of people choose to homeschool. I know it's something that's very important to me, is that I want to have that influence on my children. And it's my right to have that influence over my children because they're my children.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's for every parent to choose how they raise their kid.
Absolutely.
That's our right as
Yeah.
parents.
I
And
think that there's a lot of fear that this means that we're going to teach our children not to be accepting of others and that,
mhm, mhm,
they're because you get this a lot, right? When you're shielding your children from the things of this world, like let's say I'm not going to teach my 3-year-old daughter that she can be a boy if she wants to, and that she
yeah,
can take drugs to change her gender. And some people might say, well, that's wrong. She should know about that. She should be able to have that choice. I believe, as her parent, that it's my right to protect and shield her from things that she can't understand or that
mhm,
she shouldn't be trained or taught until she's old enough to understand. And I can say that
absolutely.
I feel like I was very, quote, sheltered and protected from certain things until I was old enough to be exposed to it. And
Yeah,
then once it didn't make me a less accepting person or a less loving person. It just allowed me to flourish and live as being a kid and
right.
not needing to be involved in understanding how people are having sex with each other.
When you don't even know or
What that
shouldn't
is
know
yet.
what that is yet. Absolutely. Yeah, that's definitely what I've realized having kids of my own and as they get older is kids start out as accepting and
Absolutely.
kind. Kids are, yes, we all have that propensity to sin and selfishness that comes very early too. But the innocence of a child doesn't have to be taught. That's already there. So
Hmm.
I know for my kids, that's, specifically talking about their this whole transgender thing and that
Hmm.
whether or not kids are being taught that at a young age. I don't teach them that yet for the same reasons because I just want them to be kids and it's already confusing enough. But if they do encounter someone else, they don't treat them any differently and they treat
Hmm.
them with love and respect. And that's the thing that I think sometimes might be missed about when you shelter your kids and you keep them home and you educate them yourself to, so they're not exposed to as many different kinds of people, that we're not still teaching our kids to be respectful and loving towards other people, even when they don't understand their life choices.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that
Yep.
I think is a misconception. And there definitely can be some people who might, treat others in more hateful ways
Hmm.
or more negative ways. Obviously, that's out there, but that's more so in public school.
Oh, absolutely. That actually kind of rolls us
That's
into the next one,
yeah,
which is a lot of the time people choose to homeschool because they're concerned about the school environment. They're concerned
exactly.
about their children's safety, bullying, the overall school environment, and it being able to motivate children. And they may prefer a setting where they have more control over their child's social interactions and safety. Because, you think about it, what is like the
Yeah,
number one thing that mothers and moms groups ask when they're moving to a new state? What do they say when they're asking about moving to an area? Are the schools good?
right.
Do they have good schools? What areas have the best schools? And what are they referring to? Academically at the top, safety at the top. No one's on there like, hey, can you tell me what the most dangerous school is in the district so I can send my kids there?
Yeah.
That's not something that a parent wants to look for their kids. And that's why a lot of parents choose to homeschool too, is to protect the safety and the innocence of their children.
Yeah, there's
Because
kind
here,
of
go
that's
ahead.
I mean, us living in the United States, like just to touch on for a second, but the whole school shooting thing. The high school that I went to when I did go to public school starting in ninth grade, was the school that had, I think it was the biggest school shooting in the United States in 2018, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas,
Yeah.
where 22, I want to say, people were killed. And that those kinds of tragedies and how often that happens, there's observationally, these are like pressure cookers for things like this happening.
Mhm.
That there, it's a public place with thousands of people congregating, and it's mainly made up of adolescents in a incredibly stressfully developmental time of their life.
And without
And
God, without moral
right.
instruction,
And
without
there's
any
no,
conversation about
and most places
demons
these,
or
right,
morality.
right. And most of these schools are structured like prison, but without protection
Mhm.
from safety officers that have firearms or, metal detectors to make sure that nobody's bringing weapons in and things like
Mhm.
that. So
Mhm.
I think that this safety, this part alone is very, very concerning, and it definitely been in my mind as raising my kids. Is it's scary to send your precious little babies off to a place that there no guarantee of their protection.
Mhm.
And this is a big and obviously it sets off huge debates of people wanting to fix it and how. But I think a big I'm not going to claim to have any answers, but getting down to the root of it is kind of, you just referenced, spiritual, and it
Yeah.
also goes in with bullying, of
Mhm.
how kids are treating each other. And
Yep.
obviously, not everybody is going to have the same background and the same family life and the same, some kids go through terrible things and then they put that on others. And you have no guarantee on if your kid is going to who they're going to be exposed to at school. And
You
so
don't.
that, yeah,
Yeah.
that definitely is a big concern of mine
And you
is,
also don't know who has been abused or sexually
mhm,
abused, and kids that are abused then abuse other kids.
yeah,
So, especially when it comes to sexual abuse, that is
absolutely.
something that ends up getting passed to other kids, and then what happens, there's so much shame surrounding that
Mhm.
children don't can't even talk to their parents about it. And the bond that exists between a parent and child has all but dissolved by this point anyway. By the time that stuff kind of starts happening, I want to say it's more common in middle and then in high school. When, if you think about it, if you're sending your child to public school from day one, from kindergarten, age 5, and now they're 13 and they've experienced something, you've now gone how many years? Almost a decade, where you are spending more time away from your children than you are with your children. I think they say
Mhm.
the average parent spends about 45 minutes with their child in the evenings at night before they go to bed. So the most influential people in their lives are their teachers and their peers and everyone that they're seeing at school. So now who are they going to talk to when something bad happens to them? They're not going
Mhm.
to go to their parents because they don't have that close relationship with them anymore. Now, I'm generalizing here, right? Some people may, but I have personally known many people that have had this experience. And I've said, "What did your parents say when you told them about this?" And they said, "Oh, I never told my mom. I didn't, I definitely didn't want to talk to my dad about that. That would be too embarrassing. There's too much shame. I didn't want to bring it up."
Mhm.
And it's so sad and heartbreaking because now you have kids that have gone through, experienced it, shoved it down, and then a lot of children end up, they're like, I don't know what to do with this, and then they carry that on, that
Mhm.
same abuse. And, you mentioned bullying before. A lot of kids that end up in these situations, like with shooting situations, they've been bullied.
Mhm.
And this is them lashing out for being mistreated for so many years.
Yeah. And I think that's possibly one of the reasons why they end up taking it to school
Mhm.
because they're seeking some kind of revenge on, the place and people that hurt them. And
Yeah.
it's a really, really sad, scary, and tragic place that our society is at. And yeah, there's obviously not any overnight solution for that. I wish there were, other than Yeshua coming back and
Well, I mean, the
making
solution
everything
is
right again.
homeschool your kids.
Well, yeah, that's why we're here today. I'm just saying to fix that school system.
Sure.
But yeah, the solution for me personally is to keep my kids home.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the to we're just trying to mitigate harm. It's
Mhm.
sheltering. We're sheltering them from harm, whether it's physical or mental or emotional, as much as we can, because they're going to be exposed to that stuff
Yeah.
someday. They're
Yeah.
going to be hurt by other people someday. Like it is inevitable, but it's part of the preservation of childhood. I think that's kind of the message behind, at least for myself, my driving force for homeschooling is preserving their childhood as long as I can. And
Sure.
I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, but our society has now had this shift of exposing kids to things earlier than maybe they
They
should
think,
be exposed
yeah,
to.
they think that kids are resilient, and kids, there's a push for independence with children way earlier than there should be.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking babies, right? We all
Yeah.
know that person that said, they're just trying to manipulate you. And the baby is literally like 1 month old.
Crying. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's kind of this idea that our society feels that independence and resilience are these traits that little baby children should have. We are adults and we don't even have resilience. We don't
Mm-mm.
even have true independence sometimes. We still need others. We still need our mom sometimes. We still need
Yeah.
our spouses, or we need the comfort of another person. That's just what it is to be human. So to throw these baby children into these situations they can't handle. Listen, I take my kids to play places and parks and stuff all the time, and I see the way that kids interact and talk to each other, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that my kids don't have to be around that without me present to adjust the
Yeah.
conversation and the way that kids are talking because I couldn't imagine. And then what happens is your kid comes back home talking like those kids that were bullying other kids. So,
Yeah. Yeah. My kids are getting exposed to more now that they're older, being around other kids who aren't homeschooled. And it's it's interesting because whenever we're around other homeschoolers, all of our kids are kind of like on the same wavelength of what they know and what they don't know. But then now mine are at the age of when they get around kids who are not homeschoolers, they're aware of way more. And it's a lot of first hearing things, whether that's the crazy Gen Z and Gen Alpha, what's it called, slang that is
yeah.
part of their culture now is so weird. I swear these are like the weirdest generations. I mean, maybe that's what boomers thought about us millennials when we were young,
I don't feel like we
but
said that weird of things though. I don't know.
I know, like saying like cool, like that's a slang word. Now kids are saying skibbity toilet. Like, what is that? But it's part of the culture that comes from, kids being exposed to each other in school, and it's not really in the homeschool world. So it's kind of funny. And then there's also curse words and just being exposed to other things.
Yeah.
But that
Yeah.
is kind of a part of life. So I'm not surprised that my kids are starting to be exposed to that. So I'm not like hating on it. Like I'm going to shelter them from ever hearing anything I don't want them to. In a way, it's kind of like you said that we might not be able to control the things that we hear, but we can be involved in how they process it.
Mhm.
So one of my boys recently, not long ago, told me that someone a neighbor he was playing with uh called their sibling the B word, but he said the word. He never heard that before. And I was like, wow, do you know what that means? He's like, I think it's a bad word. And I was like, it is a bad word. And that's not nice that that was said. And that's not something that we're going to say. So I appreciate this closeness
Mm-hmm.
and not just
Mm-hmm.
in proximity, but that we're always together, me and my kids, because then they hear something like that, they tell me about it, we talk about it, and then we move on. It's not like I'm I can control whatever they hear all the time. But if they were
Yeah.
in school and then they don't see me till 6 or 7 hours later, and then I'm not being able to be a part of
Yeah.
that
Of
and
shaping that and
exactly shaping it.
shaping their language. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I want to talk a little bit about the academic aspect of this and the curriculum. So I'm kind of going to roll this idea of a personalized education and academic concerns into kind of one topic here, because this is another reason why a lot of parents are choosing to homeschool, is because they want to tailor the curriculum to their children, be it for learning style purposes or pace, which we talked about last week, kind of just allowing our children to work at their pace and to allow them to kind of dive into their interests, which we can talk about some of these different naming conventions that they have today. But this can lead to kids enjoying school more and having a more enjoyable experience. But then the other side of this is that this can also provide an opportunity to have a more dynamic and a more specific education and really help children's needs to be met. And also, we can talk about the idea that, and it goes back to what you and I have already been talking about, which is the school choosing what to teach and us choosing what to teach, like in the example of evolution versus creationism and that type of thing. But I don't know if you want to mention like unschooling, the concept
Yeah,
of
I was actually
unschooling.
thinking about that. Yeah. Yeah. So I think, we can just touch on it and mention if you've never heard of unschooling, it's a offshoot of homeschooling where essentially it's child-led education. It's not formal curriculum like the how we break things up into subjects of science and math and language arts and history and stuff like that. Instead of doing all that, and there even are unschooling schools these days, but it
That's
still
true.
is
Yeah.
considered homeschooling, I believe. But the concept is essentially that you don't really do anything until the child expresses interest in it. So every day is kind of like almost like a free day, and you let the child be bored. That's a big part of it. And then and this is natural for children, will have a idea or interest like, I wonder how guitars work. So you take that as the child-led curriculum for the day of we're going to explore how guitars work and how we play guitar, and maybe have them take a guitar lesson and the history of guitars. And so it's kind of using the child's interests to personalize and cater their education.
Yeah.
And it could go for a lot of things, because the same could be said of science. Like you go for a hike with your kids and they're like, wow, look at this pile of roly polies. And then you use that as an opportunity to study bugs and
Hmm.
nature and things like
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the concept behind unschooling. And I think that there is varying degrees of how, if there's a spectrum of like homeschool is modeled exactly like school and unschooling is doing absolutely nothing, there is a spectrum of how close you are to either side. So I have heard some people who practice unschooling who still have formal curricula for reading and math, because that is a criticism I've heard of unschooling is children don't naturally just randomly wonder how algebra works kind of thing, like
Yeah.
math
Yeah.
isn't something that just pops into your mind, but you can work math into,
Yeah.
natural day-to-day life. So
Sure.
I mean, this is my brief summary. I don't know if you have anything else to say about unschooling, but it's gotten very popular.
It's like the school version of baby-led weaning.
Yeah,
In
yeah,
baby-led weaning, you let the child lead with you give them foods and they eat them and they try them or not. And with unschooling, it's kind of the same concept that you're allowing your child to express what they like and then you're diving deeper into that particular thing.
yeah.
So it's an interesting thing. It's becoming more and more popular. I'm sure most people have heard of Montessori schools. Montessori is kind of
It's also child-led, yeah.
a very similar kind of concept, but Montessori is much older. Unschooling is kind of like a new name, I feel like over the
Yeah, I
past
think it is a new name. I
decade or so.
definitely, I think I would say I take inspiration from that because there's something to be said about homeschooling in general. And this is probably one of my greatest driving forces, other than religious reasons, is I, like I keep saying, it's all about preservation of my kids' childhood. And I want them
Mhm,
to be kids for as much of the day that they can. And sitting at a desk for hours and doing busy work or having to do workbooks and things that they're not interested in and forcing that is not my style. So I do take a little bit of inspiration from this
yeah.
myself, that I have formal curriculum and I definitely think reading and math is important to learn, but I don't take music and, at least right now, music and history so seriously. But on any given day, my kids could ask me a question like, a few months ago, we were driving out of a parking lot and there was a dollar store. And one of my kids asked, how come things in the dollar store don't cost $1 anymore? Everything costs more than $1. And I said, that's a really good question. So I put on a podcast episode we listen to a lot of podcasts
Any
from
that you want to shout out for kids?
for this particular one, it's called Million Bazillion, and it's actually specifically about like financial topics for kids. And I brought up the episode on inflation. And so we listened to it. I didn't even totally agree on some of the points that they made because they were talking about the Federal Reserve in a really positive light. And when we listened to the whole episode, I'm like, now let me tell you about the Federal Reserve. And I even had a really good friend of mine who is a libertarian journalist. I had him send a voice memo or something about just a short summary on the Federal Reserve for kids. And we talked about it together. And this is the beauty of homeschooling,
Hmm.
is that they ask me a question and then I get to kind of do a short little lesson on inflation, and I get to talk about my my point of view, not
Hmm.
just what a textbook says
Exactly.
or what
Exactly.
any one entity says. They can be exposed to the positive and the negative. They can be exposed to someone else's point of view and my point of view. And then they
Hmm.
can choose what they want to believe. And
Hmm.
that's so anyway, this was a tangent to say, in this sense, I kind of like that unschooling flavor of
Sure.
something
Yeah.
that comes up because we have time together. Let's explore that topic together. And that's just
Yeah.
one example. We do this constantly all the time with
Yeah.
everything.
I pulled a book that I have to read here. I don't know if you can see what this says.
Oh,
Oh, my blur. Can you see it? Can you see it? No.
put it right
The
next to your
roots,
face.
put it right next to my face. Will it work?
No, it's still blur. Oh, there you go. In front of your face. Put it in front of your face. There. Yes, I can see it now.
The Roots of the Federal Reserve, tracing
Yeah.
the Nephilim from Noah to the US dollar. Dr. Laura Sanger.
Yes. I didn't
So
get totally into all of that with the Federal Reserve. That's more of maybe a fifth grade lesson,
yeah, right.
but the
Well,
kindergarten lesson.
this kind of rolls into something that I want to mention, which is you just briefly mentioned this idea that what is taught in a textbook, and there it's a very black and white, it's one
Yeah.
opinion, it's one way, it's the
And it's
record of
biased.
it's biased, it's the record of history that this school system wants to teach. And this is the reason why our parents chose to homeschool in the first
Mhm.
place, was because of this. When
Yeah.
they were schooling our oldest brother, it was in the 80s. And during that time, evolution was new to the curriculum. So it was not part of the public school curriculum. Charles Darwin wrote his Origin of Species in 1859, and it was not accepted. It was not a widely accepted, theory, I guess you could say. But it took people that were very anti-God and atheists, essentially, and agnostic people to say, well, we believe this. And it was a very counter God argument. But yet somehow it was pushed more and more after World War II and taken to the US Supreme Court, actually. And in 1968, they placed evolution in the public school curriculum. And it was in a case called Epperson versus Arkansas in 1968, where they struck down a law banning the teaching of evolution in public schools. And they ruled that the bans were unconstitutional, and that they had violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. So, starting in the 80s, teaching evolution became the norm and became generally accepted. So, kind of out of nowhere, people were being taught God created the earth forever before this, before 1968. Some folks push it and saying, well, we want to teach this, take it to court, get it pushed through, and now it's something that becomes this massively taught theory. And the thing that's the craziest is now doctors and scientists are coming out today in 2024 saying it's rubbish, it's trash, and it
Hmm.
doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't hold any water. And
Yeah,
so
but
what
because it's
people have been
our
teaching this for
generation.
40 years,
Yeah,
and it's
because our generation was one of the first that this is an integral part of the curriculum.
yeah,
You are told that you're crazy if you believe anything else, because
yeah,
that's kind of how it goes, is what's decided on as quote unquote truth for curriculum and textbooks that are then bought and used in public schools by the
mm-hmm,
government.
mm-hmm.
If you have a differing opinion than that, then you're told that you're crazy.
Yeah, you're crazy, you're a conspiracy theorist, you don't know what you're talking about, you're uneducated,
Right.
you're clueless. Honestly, this kind of reminds me of 2020, doesn't it? Doesn't this have 2020 vibes to it, where people said this is going to be all about a vaccine. The vaccine is going to poison people. And
Yeah.
people were like, no, get the shot, get the shot. And now here we are in a couple years later, and they're admitting the shot injures people
Yeah.
and it causes cancer.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. People were screaming from the rooftops, evolution is not it. It is not the way. This is not the truth. And being shot down for it, you're just a bigot, you're just an idiot. You're just,
Yeah.
you're just dispelling science, but science. So, this is a big reason to homeschool, and in fact, reason why our parents went to Tallahassee and lobbied for homeschooling in the 80s, which homeschooling became legal in 1985 because of this lobbying
In
that other
Florida.
parents were doing in the
I
state of
think it was,
Florida.
yeah, I
In
think
the state of
different
Florida.
states had it legal. Yeah.
Exactly. But in that state, because they wanted to be able to choose what their children were being taught. And so it's very important, you know, so it's one of the most important things. As Rachel and I figured, we have gone on a lot of tangents in this episode so far. So I'm going to run through a couple other reasons for homeschooling, and then we're going to wrap up. And next week, we're going to talk about the other points. I'll summarize that when we get through what we get through. But kind of the other big reasons that people homeschool: flexibility. So schedule, you have a more flexible lifestyle. Special needs. This is a huge one. A lot of parents, and especially for us during the early 90s when you and I were being homeschooled, and autism was not something that was being diagnosed and understood, and people didn't understand ADHD and ADD and all of that stuff. Parents were keeping their children home because being in a school environment was not the right place for them.
Mhm.
Now, of course, today there are more special needs programs, but you know, you don't know how or what they're doing with your children, just like when we talked about in the bullying point. It also allows for stronger family bonds. Because, like I said a little bit ago, your kid spending 7, 8 hours with other people, with strangers, being home with mom for 7, 8 hours, you're going to create a strong bond. Really, the desire for independent thinking and learning and allowing your children to explore the subjects more deeply and really develop critical thinking, that's a huge reason. And I think kind of goes along with what we were just talking about. And then the last point being really a dissatisfaction with traditional education, just dissatisfied with this one size fits all. You're sitting, you're doing this, then you're doing this, then you're doing this, and you're doing this in such a way. Um, you know, Kind of some other alternatives that we talked about were Montessori, but also classical education or unschooling. Those are kind of the opposite of this: sit in a classroom, sit at your desk for 8 hours and learn this one and only way.
Can I use this one point to do a very brief example that will be a tangent? I'll make it super quick because it
Okay.
just popped into my mind of having the independence and the the ability to have flexibility is, and I didn't even intend for this to be a homeschooling lesson, but my oldest child, Everett, he has wanted to have his own business since he was like 5 years old. He's constantly coming up with ideas. He's asked me 100 times if he could sell all his toys to his friends because he wants to make money, or have a lemonade stand, or sell cookies, or sell this or that. Like, this kid is like money motivated. He's always wanted a way to make money. And one day he came up to me after quiet time with, and you know the story, but I've never talked about it on here on the podcast because it happened a year ago, with two pieces of Legos that he tied to a string, and he made them into a necklace that when they clipped together made a heart. So a heart necklace. He's like, "Mom, look what I made in my room." And as soon as he showed it to me, I'm like, "This is great. Like, this is a really cool thing. I think you can make these and sell them." He's like, "Really? Like my own business?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, I want to do that." And I was like, "I'll tell you what, I'll be your first investor." And I ordered all the pieces for him. And then we got them all, and we troubleshooted like what kind of string to use and this and that. And we made his product. And then we got to go through this process of starting a business, running a business. I taught him how to have a assembly line, how to create consistency in product. And I started out just posting on my social media about them and friends and family buying them. But then everyone loved them so much, and people wanted to buy them for their friends or their kids' classrooms or whatever, that I ended up starting an Etsy page for him, and we started selling at farmers markets. So he's gotten this crash course in entrepreneurship and owning a business at 7, 8 years old.
Yeah.
And his business name is called Brick Network Factory. You can find us on Etsy. Maybe Rebecca can put it in the show notes if
Yeah, I'll
anyone
link
is
it.
interested, because people love the story of a second grader who started this Lego business, and he has the cutest designs. He's got a lot of stuff now. But anyway, I just wanted to take this as as you know, you're closing out, as an example of the beauty that can come from homeschooling, of
Absolutely.
using their imagination and their freedom, and then me as their parent able to take that and teach them about very real world skills and learn alongside them because I didn't know
Yeah.
how to do any of this stuff
Yeah.
either. So
Yeah.
it's really, really cool to be able to do this kind of stuff with your kids.
Absolutely. I was looking around my desk because I have brick network necklaces everywhere.
You got a lot
Everywhere.
of them.
I'm one of
I
the
should have one too over here.
founding investors of Brick
Yes.
Network, but
Aunt B has invested heavily in Brick Network.
I really love his princess collection. He has a princess collection that are inspired by the different, Belle and Aurora and all that. And Brooke
Yeah.
has all of them that she can match with all her outfits and stuff. And so definitely I'll link Everett's business in the show notes, but that is such a great example of the things that you can do when
Mhm.
you're homeschooled.
Yeah.
So love
Yeah.
that. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that. That was
Yeah.
great. That was perfect.
Yeah. It
All
just
right.
popped into my head.
Well, now we ran out of time as
Yeah.
predicted. So next week we're going to talk about what about when things get hard in middle school and high school, and then we're going to talk about the college age and kind of how all of that works. But thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you learned something from today, or this was a helpful conversation, or kind of just got you excited or inspired in your own plans with schooling and kind of what to do next. So thank you for
Yeah.
being on this journey with us, everybody.
Yeah.
If you'd like to follow along outside the podcast, be sure to join the mission on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at The Radiant Mission. And today we're going to close with a verse that really emphasizes the value of continuous learning and seeking guidance, and really highlighting that wisdom and discernment come through actively pursuing knowledge and understanding. And that is Proverbs 1, verse 5. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. We're wishing you a radiant week, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.